What was our promise and our commitment to the bank? Well, if we reread the construction loan, it says that the construction loan for $325,000 was obtained from the commercial bank. The loan was to be repaid when permanent financing was secured. Well, with the private investor's mortgage of $305,000, we have secured permanent financing, and we now have an obligation to make good the promise to the bank. So from our available cash, we reduce it by $325,000 to pay off the construction loan and to remove the bank's contribution from our balance sheet. We no longer have an obligation to the banker. And we better test our cash account, add the $305,000 from the private investor, which to our available balance brings it to $412,400, enabling us to pay the construction loan back to the bank, which we promised to do, which now leaves our cash balance at $87,400. So if we drew a line now on our fundamental managerial equation and added up the things and the promises and the prayers, are we in balance? Well, I think if you took the time to do so mathematically, we would find that indeed the things equal the people who made those contributions. But we're not productive as a restaurant yet. Of the $367,600 facility, we now find out that the land cost $150,000 and the balance was for the building. An independent appraiser valued the land, however, at $175,000. So this raises one of the accounting principles that we will discuss today, is the cost principle. And although the land is worth $175,000, the cost principle in accounting requires us to record the value of the land at cost. So this temporary facility now of $367,000 is going to be removed from the books. And in its place, we are going to enter the two accounts that will become permanent on the balance sheet. The land that has a value of $150,000, and the balance was for the building. So from $367,600, we subtract the $150,000 for the land, and we find that the building has a value of $217,600. There is no entry in the liability column, and there is no entry in the owner's equity column. And again, we remain in balance. We have converted the temporary account, the facility, into the sum of its parts, the land, $150,000, and the building, $217,600. Furniture and fixtures costing $98,400 were purchased. Well, if we look at the cash account, I think we have a little problem. What's our available cash balance? You know, $87,400. We're a little short. We better keep reading. Oh, a promissory note of $30,000 was negotiated and signed for with personal guarantees from the owner. All right, so we got another $30,000 in cash and a note payable, a promissory note, signed with personal guarantees from the owner. That sounds like a promise. So now we have a note payable in the amount of $30,000, which keeps that entry in balance, no entry in the equity column. Let's update the cash account. Plus $30,000, the proceeds from the note, bringing the cash balance to $117,400, leaving us with enough funds to now purchase this $98,000 worth of equipment, which will be our next entry. So cash is being decreased by $98,400, and on the same line in the same column, we are going to convert that cash into the furniture and fixtures, which I'll abbreviate FF&E, in the same dollar amount, $98,400. Please add a 0 to the liability column and a 0 to the equity column, as again that was a conversion. Converted cash into furniture and fixtures. So updating the cash account, we reduce cash by $98,400, which leaves us with a cash balance of $19,000. And management's job is to be as productive with the resources as they can be. That is necessary in order to fulfill the promises and to answer the prayers. And along the way, our place is starting to look a little bit more like a restaurant. The interest rate on this loan, if you might want to make a note, was 13%. That's an annual interest rate. And we also discovered that the agreement also included a line of credit provision, which was also guaranteed. Many businesses have provision for a line of credit. Access to cash is more important than necessarily having the cash on hand at the time. A local kitchen equipment leasing company supplied $80,000 worth of assets. Well, the kinds of assets that a kitchen equipment leasing company provides sounds like ranges, ice machines perhaps, things that really enable us to become a restaurant with a kitchen. So we add kitchen equipment in the amount of $80,000. And now the question becomes, what's the entry to keep this in balance? Well, this equipment has been signed for over the course of a 7-year lease agreement. And what this transaction entails is really a way to purchase and finance equipment that we will eventually own at the end of the lease. And accounting rules call this a capitalized lease and must be recorded on the balance sheet because we have the use and enjoyment of someone else's kitchen equipment over the course of that lease until the termination occurs, at which point we now own that equipment. So we have to have an offsetting liability in the same amount. So in the promises or the liability column, we need to make an entry for the leasing company in the amount of $80,000. We enter 0 in the equity column to indicate that there was no change there. So notice that this was a transaction that did not involve the use of any cash, really is 100% financing for the kitchen equipment over the span of a 7-year time period. An additional investment was made outside of the lease for $9,200 worth of additional equipment. These would be small wares, cutting boards, steam table pans, bain-maries, saute pans, etc. And it's not quite clear how this investment was actually made in terms of funds. Well, we can look at a cash account and say, well, we have $19,000 cash on hand. So we have the cash to purchase it, but it's not clear whether cash was used or whether some other transaction occurred. If we keep reading the opening chronology, we may discover some clues as to what's the appropriate transaction entry for that particular decision. So let's skip that for a minute and continue. We find that food and beverages costing $24,800 were obtained from local purveyors. Well, if we look at our cash balance of $19,000, disregarding the $9,200 for the additional equipment, clearly we don't have the cash for both of those, which suggests that these were probably obtained on credit. And in fact, they were. So we're going to go back to the $9,200 additional equipment. And in the asset column, we are going to increase the equipment account by $9,200. And the offsetting entry is going to be a liability and accounts payable to the equipment dealer in town in the same amount, $9,200. There's no change to the equity column. Food and beverages, $24,800. That represents our opening inventory, and we will record it as such in our fundamental accounting equation in the asset column, $24,800. And the offsetting entry for that will also be in accounts payable in the amount of $24,800. No change to the equity account. We're down to our last paragraph, and we find that the corporation, having some excess cash on hand, invested $12,500 in the savings or interest-bearing time deposit. Well, do we have the cash? Yes, the cash balance is $19,000. So our entry here is a reduction to cash of $12,500. The offsetting entry is an increase to the time deposit, which I'll abbreviate T period D, in the amount of $12,500. There is no change to the liabilities, there is no change to the equity, and that is our final entry. Let's update the cash account, deduct the $12,500 from the cash account, and we have $6,500 in our available cash balance when we open the restaurant doors. The other $12,500 is also cash, but it is presently tied up in a time deposit and is not part of the restaurant's operating account or the cash on hand, the $6,500. Well, at this point, we have made all of the entries into our fundamental managerial equation, and it's time to determine whether or not we are in balance. So we need to sum each of the three columns. The easiest one, obviously, is the one with the fewest entries. And if we sum the owner's equity column, we find that we have a total equity balance of $150,000 in equity from the owner's contribution. The column with the next fewest entries is the liability column. And we start with the bank that contributed $325,000, and we find that 2 or 3 lines down, that promise has already been made good. We repaid the bank $325,000, so those entries have offset each other. So all that's left is summing the contributions made by the other people, our private investor, the amount of $305,000, the note payable, the amount of $30,000, the leased assets from the leasing company, $80,000, and our 2 account payables in the amounts of $9,200 and $24,800 respectively. And that sums to $449,000. Well, since the things have to equal the people making the contributions, if we add the $449,000 in liabilities to the $150,000 in equity, we find that we have $599,000 in assets on opening day. And to test that, we can go back up through the column to check those transactions and the offsets, and we'll see that in fact it does add up to $599,000.